Welcome to the October 2021 CIECAST, CIECA 2021 R2 release. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director of CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communication standards that allow the collision industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this one to help educate both members and non-members alike. Today's presenters are Paulette Reed, Technical Project Manager for CIECA, Phil Martinez, Technical Consultant for Mitchell International, Dan Webster, Principal Architect for Enlight and Chair of the CIECA Architecture Committee. As we start the webinar, I want to remind you there is no verbal communication between the participants and the presenter. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the question panel on the webinar screen. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And now I'll turn it over to Paulette Reed.
Hi everyone. I just wanted to kind of go over today's agenda. We have a history of the CIECA standards that Phil is going to present to. Then we have the future of CIECA standards and Architecture Committee update by Dan Webster. And then we have a recap of the 2021 R2 release. And then I'm going to go over the new CIECA.com website. And then we're going to go over what's going on with the CIECA committees. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil Martinez for our first agenda.
All right, thank you, Paulette. I appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. This presentation will include three pieces. I'm going to go over the past, the present, and the future of our CIECA standards. Like any organization, it has evolved over time. Right now is an exciting time for CIECA as we embark in our next chapter of developing standards. I've been with Mitchell almost 30 years now, so I've been involved in the development and seeing all of these standards developed over this 30-year period. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the standards, kind of the history of it, where we started, and then some of the common themes we've seen as developing these standards over these years. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right. So each standard, each CIECA standard that we've developed typically has a unique role within our industry. We began in X12 developing CIECA standards. We started working on the first data standards for carriers to send vendors assignment data and populate their estimating systems. This is where I learned about an organization called ASC X12. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it, but it is the Accredited Standards Committee that develops data standards for the industry. A lot of you may have heard ASC X12 referred to by medical standards because federal government mandates the use of those standards. At this time, it was the largest and most recognized, and this is back in the 90s, the largest and most recognized data standards organization at the time. We began developing the assignment standards and soon after began working on the estimate data standards. At the time, there were many carriers that were involved in X12. We would meet quarterly at the time, and we would work on developing all of those type of data requirements that everybody required. The one thing I want to really hit on here is there was a lot of participation at that time. When we started developing those standards, there were a lot of companies that were involved because they wanted to make sure that their interests were included in these standards. It took many years to complete the standards because of the rigid process that ASC X12 had and the fact that they only met quarterly. So if you missed an opportunity to get a change in one meeting, you had to wait 3 months before being able to present it at the next meeting. So it was the problem though with the ASC X12 standards was it was never very highly adopted across the industry. And this was due to some of the high costs of translation software. You know, and there only large companies at the time could invest the money and the infrastructure and the resources to develop these things and support these expensive translators, because they were translators that were available to support these standards at the time. Soon after that, along came EMS. We found that there was a need to be able to exchange information between local systems. ASCX 12 was, you know, not the standard to be used to exchange that information between applications. So then CIECA looked at developing the standard. We started developing EMS, and again, it had a unique role to play within the industry and within for our trading partners. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Right. So now let's look at the BMS, today's standards. How did we get to the BMS? You know, at some point we looked at the industry. The industry was developing new technology. Members started using XML, and it was the ideal time for CIECA to look at developing its next standard. We decided to develop it in-house. What we did was we looked at what is being used within the industry today, and what would we use to develop that standard. So what we did was we took the EMS and we took the X12 standards, the 124, which is the estimate standard, and the 272. And we took all these and any additional information that companies wanted and thought, you know, was a good time to add to those standards. And we, you know, outputted the BMS. And that's kind of how we got to it. The first version that we developed when we officially called, you know, or released a version was more of a proof of concept. We found that there was more information that was required and needed within the standard before really anyone would implement it. So it was more of a proof of concept. So at that point, then we finally delivered our first standard and our first services. And you would see the estimate and the assignment being used, and then it snowballed from there. You can see today we have many services, and it serves many areas of our industry, the BMS. And you know, at that time, again, we had a lot of participation at the time. So you'll notice a theme here. When we started our X12 standards, when we started the EMS standards, you started seeing a lot of participation from, you know, from participants within and members from within CIECA to make sure that their interests were looked after as these standards were developed. Because as you know, every company has, you know, does something a little bit different, but we also have a lot of things in common that we share. So therefore, you know, if you want your specific data requirements included in the standard, when it's being developed is the time to be involved and make sure that you get those things included within your standards. EMS, I want to talk a little bit more about EMS. Why is it still around? It plays a unique role. While we thought the BMS would replace EMS, you know, again, it's something that we feel, you know, as architecture committee and members of CIECA, that it would replace it. But we found that it played a unique role and it still works, and a lot of companies still support it. So it's still around, and I believe it'll be around for some time to come. You know, but we will, you know, you'll see maybe the use of these type of standards maybe shift, and the new standards possibly potentially replace these, but you know, the new standards will be potentially for new services. So we have to start thinking outside the box and what new services and standards we can develop for the industry. Let's go on to the next slide. All right. So as we begin our journey, I want to welcome everybody to our next phase in development of our standards. We should be asking ourselves some of the same questions we did as we develop these past standards. It's not the first time we've developed standards, so as we look to the future, we need to remember the past, and we need to remember what we did good and what we could do better. I don't think we did anything wrong. We always learn as we develop these new standards. And I feel, the one thing we're missing right now is participation. We really need those of you that have experience developing JSON messages and using REST services to join our committees and help us once again be successful and deliver the industry the newest and the best standards possible. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to the future, and here to present the future is Paulette Reed, CIECA's project coordinator, and Dan Webster, the Mitchell architect and the chairman of the CIECA Architecture Committee.
Thank you, Phil. I've got this one slide to present to tell you the perspective of the Architecture Committee of CIECA and what it looks like in this particular year. So I've been on the Architecture Committee since it was renamed from the EMS Committee in 2002. I guess I could say I've been on it off and on since that time. And the main thing we've been doing for those 20 years is maintaining the Bms standard with twice yearly updates. It's been a very active process over the years, and we have improved the maintenance of Bms very much so, to the point that Paulette has this down to a science. And the meetings we used to have twice a year for 3 days at some host company, I think she got the last one done in a 2-hour Microsoft Teams call. So that isn't really what the Architecture Committee is fundamentally needed for anymore. And what we're doing is another round of reinventing ourselves, adopting current technologies, just like we went from the EDI and the D standards to XML 20 years ago. We're now casting about for the current technologies to use. And what we've found is it's very popular to use Open API specification, OAS, and JSON schema for current APIs, application programming interfaces, also known as REST APIs for the technology that is often used on these things. But CIECA since 2013 has had some interest in JSON and in REST and doing things about it on the Architecture Committee, but it's really in 2021 taken a leap forward, had really serious talk about which versions of OAS and JSON we were going to use, how we were going to use them. And the people on the committee are practitioners of this technology currently. So things have moved forward, and it's time to refresh our standards. And what we're doing is proofs of concept using the Open API spec and JSON schema. And those proofs of concept are helping us to find and address issues. And you'll recall a couple slides ago, Phil showed a funnel of all the elements we wanted to combine, the things from X12 and EMS and things that we found were missing from those all together into the basis of the new standard. And we're doing the same thing now, finding out what is needed in 2021 and the foreseeable future, casting it in the language of JSON and JSON schema and Open API specification, and building our next generation standard out of that. What we're also finding that wouldn't have been shown in the funnel diagram is maybe we have added a little too much detail and too much comprehensiveness in the BMS schema. So we're also streamlining it. Flattening is a favorite word on the committee these days, but we're trying to use what's needed, only what's needed, and make the standards more understandable and approachable. So what I'm finding is that we're at a time, as we were 20 years ago, where we're using new technologies, we're looking at the future and combining that with expertise in the industry that CIECA is all about. And it's a exciting, interesting time where your contributions can really be magnified at this point. And I'd like to urge anyone who's hearing my voice to come and see for yourself some Wednesday soon. And if you were to do that, you'd be joining our architecture committee, which is run so ably by Paulette Reed, and she will present to you the updates we did in the most recent twice yearly release of CIECA BMS.
Thank you, Dan. So I just wanted to give everybody an update of what we just released yesterday. We have the 2021 R2 release. We had a master code list values that were added. We had line item category values that were requested by Hollander. We had new option code values that were requested from the Emerging Technology Committee. We deprecated the OTSP code, and we added our standard versioning of our release as 6.4.0 in our BMS. We also updated the user-defined area in the BMS to not be optional repeating and just optional to be in sync with the schema. Just a reminder, the BMS and the schema should be in sync all the time, but if we do find a discrepancy, the schema wins. So we would change the BMS to be what's equal in the schema. And then we had a master code list additions to the test instances. So anytime we add anything to our master code list, or if we change a schema, add any values, we also create test instances that prove that that functionality works. So that are the changes in high level. To get into a little bit more detail, the line item category code list, we had ELWH that was added for the electrical category for wire harness. We had ENLS added to the engine category for lower shield. We had INAR added to the interior category for armrest, and INFM added to the interior floor mat. So to give you a little bit of information about where the line item category codes are used, right now they're found in the part info data aggregate, and it's used in additional parts, damaged parts, missing parts, and non-standard parts, and that's also under the parts aggregate. The parts aggregate is used in the rental vehicle description and vehicle description. It's also found in the damage line info and damage line history info data aggregates. So some of the messages that you could find the line item category code list in are the repair order add request, claim info add response, repair status change request, the production stage change request, vehicle damage estimate add request, repair order folder add request, and a survey customer list add request. So that's just some of the messages that you could use these new codes in. The other options codes were added to the master code list, and this was added from the Emerging Technology. As part of that committee, they was identifying all the ADAS features and wanted those to be able to be identified in the messages. So all of the ADAS features were put in a safety and security category. So we had FWSS for four-wheel steering, ADA for active driver assist, AEB for automatic emergency braking, AES for automatic emergency steering, BUC for backup camera, DMS for driver monitoring, DYL for dynamic lighting, FCW for forward collision warning, LKA for lane keep assistance, NBDA for navigation-based driver assist, PCWS for parking collision warning, RCTW for repair cross-traffic warning, RPA for remote parking assist, REB for reverse automatic emergencies braking, SVCS for surround view camera, and TPA for trailer parking assist. Some of the areas where these codes can be used in our schemas, and we have them found in the engine options, transmission options, and vehicle options of our data aggregates. The engine options is found in the powertrain data aggregate, transmission options found in the transmission info data aggregate, and the vehicle options are found in the vehicle description data aggregates. So some of these messages that impacted with these option codes are the repair order add request, claim info add response, repair status change request, production stage change request, vehicle damage estimate add request, repair order folder add request, and survey customer list add request. As I mentioned, we deprecated the OTSP code in our 2021 R1 QA. We was going through we were syncing. One of the projects for the last release was to sync other charges rate type code list and the total type code list. And when we was reviewing, we found out that OTSP and OTSH were both in our code list for other special paint material. So we wanted to deprecate one of those, and OTSH was also used under the material. So in keeping that code, we deprecated the OTSP and the other charges code list, the rate type code list, and the total type code list. Just a reminder that deprecated codes can still be used. It does just have a recommendation code when you pull that up, but they are still out there, so it does not break any messages that are currently using it. So now I wanted to go over, if you've been out to CIECA.com in the last week, you notice that we have a new look and feel. So the same information is provided just in a little different way. We still have our homepage. It tells you what is CIECA and the mission, the visions, who uses CIECA and our CIECA members. We have standards, and this is an area where we changed the presentation to be more products based. So we talk about our APIs and our BMS and our EMS, and then we talk about each of the business use cases for those, and we have implementation guides. And then our CIECA committees are also under our standard section still. We have membership, CIECAST and Connects, news and events, and about. So I am going to do a quick demo of our new web page. As I said, our home page has our what is CIECA, and then we have what are our standards, and encompasses our high level vision of what our standards are, who uses the standards, and then we have our CIECA companies all listed here with links to those companies. But as technical resources and for this committee, I wanted to focus on the standards. So we have our CIECA products. And again, we have the API standards, which is under development. We have BMS standards, and we have the EMS standard. So you could go into the BMS standards, and you'll see all of our business use cases. And here's where the difference is. So we have all of these services: the appointment, assignment, estimate, first notice of loss, invoice, procurement, survey and title, vehicle repair. So this is all the things that anybody can see if they want to know what CIECA provides and what messages, they can go into this web page and easily pull that up. Under the standards, you can go into CIECA business use cases and you can get to them all in the drop-down list. So we have the products. We also have the EMS standards, and you'll notice that estimate is also on the EMS side. Estimate is the only one that currently goes to both BMS and the EMS. So if we look at our estimate use cases, this is our business use case that shows all of, to anybody that wants to know what an estimate use case is. And it shows a description, it shows actors, the business segment, the industry segment to using estimate services, and then it has what triggers using these services, and it gives a information that triggers it. And then we have our workflows and our outcome for these. So if you look at our workflows, anything that is tied to an estimate, we have a workflow design. And this is for all of our pages, and all of our workflows are now here. So we only have one version of the, instead of it being in the use cases and in the implementation guides, this is the only place where the workflows are going to be displayed. And then our estimate solutions available in CIECA. Here's everything that the estimate has. We have the vehicle damage add, change, the estimate response messages, our vehicle damage photo estimate, and our property damage. And then we have the EMS estimate. One thing I want to go back to is our workflows and these pages here, they are member only. So I'm already signed in. So that's why when I went to the workflows, I didn't get asked. But if you click on these, you would be asked for your just to sign in. And so we have the vehicle damage estimate ads. So these are our implementation guides that are very specific to the messages themselves. And again, we just have a description of what the messages can do and how the industry will benefit from using it. And then we have the triggers for this specific message, not the messages in general. We have the request, which is our vehicle damage estimate add request, a little bit of information and the outcome of what's going to happen when that request is sent, then our outcome. Then to actually get into our standards, we have the CIECA BMS and releases. So if you click on that, you're going to go into your folder system in our work drive, and you'll see the current release and the archived releases. I'm going to go into the archived releases just to show you that these are all of the BMS versions from the past. And so if you need to get to those versions, that was where you would go. And then our current release, which is now the 6.4.0 that was released yesterday, we have all of these headings underneath it, the test instances, the master code list, the BMS and the implementation guides and schema. And you'll see that that's very familiar to these links. So the BMS, these are the references to everything that you would need to go when you go into the BMS. This would take you right to the current version BMS, and you would go into section 5.2 to see the vehicle damage estimate add request information. Again, the master code list, these are all the code lists that this message uses. So you can easily go into those and see if, what their values are. Our schemas are our BMS common global types and estimates. And again, if you go into our schemas list here, you'll see all of these. And you could, let me go back, change this through. Another thing I wanted to notice is that you can go over to the side, and I can't get there because of the, but you could shift the order into alphabetical. And then here, if you wanted to go back out to the current release and go to just like schemas, you could click here and you could do a download. And if you download this, it will create a zip file for you. So this is how you would download the information instead of just viewing it on the page. So we have the schemas, we have implementation guides. In the future, we're wanting to make an implementation guide just for each of these messages. However, right now they're still in the numerous implementation guides through our committees. So this tells you which committees and which implementation guides are being used that you can look at to find out different ways and scenarios of implementing this message. And then we have all of our test instances and examples. And like I said, anytime we make a change to a code list or schema, we add a test instance to make sure that we are validating that. So that is the version of how our BMS ones look. Our EMS, and again, EMS is only the estimate. We have the same layout, but it will take you to the EMS folders, which shows you the different versions out here. And then if you go into the EMS, it says that version 2.6 is the latest release. And at this time, it will just bring up the CK estimate or the EMS. And right now, the master code list for that is out here. And then we have the implementation guides and test instances coming soon. So what's going on in our CIECA standards committees today? We already went over the architecture. Dan already spoke about that. We have that committee that is weekly. We have the recycled parts and inventory committee that are looking at the impacts of the EV and battery life cycle to determine the impact of the CIECA messages that are monthly. We have emerging technology is looking at ADAS, telematics, cybersecurity, electrification, artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies to determine the impact of CIECA messages. Those are bi-weekly meetings. And we have repair order and repair status that are looking at the existing pain points with current CIECA messages and what new messages may be needed in the API world. And they are meeting monthly. And VDI will be kicking off soon and probably merging with the repair order, repair status meeting committee to work on the OEM repair procedures and build sheet data that emerging technologies identified. So I wanted to show everybody, I'll go back out to our CIECA.com. And if you wanted to find out information, you would go under standards and do our CIECA committees. So we have a high level, we have the governance committees, which is our standard advisory board, which is all of our chairmen that come in and they meet here, our architecture committee and our education committee. And then our technical committees is our standard development. We have calibration, environmental reporting, customer satisfaction, emerging data trends, first notice of loss, blasts, information, privacy, parts and procurement, photo estimate, recycled parts and inventory, rental management, repair order, and so on. And when you go in, if you're interested in any of these committees, or if you know of a message that is causing an issue right now, or you need data for something, we can go in and you can either reach out to me and I can activate a committee, or we can start a new committee to get those standards. But if you want to join a committee, let's say emerging technologies, you would go out and this would tell you all the emerging technologies committees. What we always have our antitrust, we have our members, we have our scope and objectives and our operating guidelines. A little background about the meeting, the committee, the missions, all the industry segments that are a part of the committee. And then we have our team map here that shows the people that are coming to the meeting, our chairmen and all the members that are currently attending. So if you knew somebody, you could reach out to them or myself for more information. And again, you could go in, I wanted to show you recycled parts and inventory committee. If you would go in that one and other committees that have messages, it'll show you the related CIECA messages that they've worked with. So like they've worked with the parts and procurement and the repair order services and the remittance and billing services. So any information that you need about your committees could be there, or you could just reach out to me and I can help you. And if you have any changes or requests or any pain points with any of the messages or the data that you get today, just let me know and we can work with that. So I wanted to let you know that our CIECA social media, we've got a LinkedIn account, a Facebook account, and a Twitter account. And be on the lookout for the CIECA events on our new page under the CIECA Connects, and we have a calendar section. And I wanted to thank you, and Phil and Dan wanted to thank you for attending today. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Paul and Stacy to go over any questions that we have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paulette. Stacy, do we have any questions for the panel?
No, we don't at this time, but if anyone has questions in the future, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Our contact information is on the new website.
All right, great. Well, thank you all. Thank you for attending. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.